And with that, I asked a friend to come up and read something before we get started.
Mr. Jones. Yes, sir.
Good morning. Good morning. My name's Robert. I'm an alcoholic. This is a great thing, man. It's real good to see all of you guys, all my family, all these guys who helped me to not die. And by the way, as a side project, find God. How about that? So, love you, Teddy. Thanks for asking me to be a serviceman. I appreciate it. Lack of power. That was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves. Obviously. But where and how were we to find this power? We can only clear the ground a bit if our testimony helps sweep away prejudice, enables you to think honestly, encourages you to search diligently within yourself. Then, if you wish, you can join us on the broad highway. With this attitude, you cannot fail. The consciousness of your belief is sure to come to you. Chapter 4, We Agnostics, pages 45 and 55. Thanks for letting me be of service.
Thanks, Robert.
Thank you, Robert. And with that, our speaker on step 2 will be Steve B. from Princeton, New Jersey.
All right. Hey, everybody. My name's Steve, and I am an alcoholic. My sobriety date, April 18th, 2014. Not my first sobriety date. I have a home group, the Common Solution Group. We meet Monday nights in Princeton. We are a hybrid format. We're in-person speakers and people, and we picked up a lot of out-of-state people during the pandemic. So it's a big book step study. We kind of go through the book line by line and have people share their experience with how they experience this process, the 12 steps. Step 2. I grew up Irish Catholic, was an altar boy. I came in here with a lot of old ideas. Didn't know they were old ideas. Didn't really grow up in an alcoholic home, although my family tree has a lot of bottles in it. And when I first had my first experience with alcohol, I was 15 years old. I went to visit my brother at school at Slippery Rock University. Yep. And first night I remember drinking alcohol. I remember the effect produced by it, and I was just like, yeah, I'm going to be back here a lot. And halfway through the night, I'm loving on everybody. I'm finally belonging. I'm 15 years old at a college party, and I'm looking for my brother. And I don't know where he is, and I go upstairs in this fraternity house that he was a member of. And if you guys have ever seen that 70s show, where they have the little camera pan around the room, there's smoke filled in the air and things like that, that's where I found my brother. And that's where I found my second spiritual experience, right? And man, I just started drinking and partying, and I drank the way I wanted to drink. I drank for effect. I was, a standout athlete growing up, played hockey for 20 plus years, played a period of professional golf for a period of time. I thought the world was my oyster, and I never really mixed the sports with the partying yet. And I just remember, being 18 years old and, off at college, that's when the alcoholism really accelerated. I started drinking every day, with these guys in Tennessee, and they taught me how to drink whiskey and play poker, and it became like a daily thing. And I never tried to stop. I was drinking the way everybody else around me was drinking. I didn't see a problem with it. I was just like, well, that's kind of what we do. And then I started finding people being able to go to these bars and stuff, and I couldn't get in, couldn't get served, and I was like, well, this is some BS. And I remember going going back to visit my brother in school. I go back home. The freshman year of college didn't work out really well, and I wanted to go back home and kind of regroup. And I ended up going and visiting my brother, and I memorized his social security number, and I got his birth certificate out of my parents' closet, and I went into his bursar's office, and I got my picture taken on his student ID, so I could go to the DMV and get a duplicate driver's license, because this is what willing to go to any length looks like. Okay. I go out there, and then I walk into the Pennsylvania DMV because I knew my brother was moving to Massachusetts, and he was going to get a driver's license up there. So I'm like, closing all the loopholes, right? And I go, and I've got this, I go in to the DMV, and I sit down, and I get my picture taken on an actual Pennsylvania driver's license with my signature on it. And I was just like, wow, this is, now we can get down to it. And it was just one of those things where within 6 months, I get kicked out of my house. I gotta find a job. I'm out of school. My life is falling down around me, and I was like, all right, this is enough. I had this big belief system that I had to graduate school, and I had to go out and check the life boxes, get the cash, the prizes, graduate from school, and get into a relationship. I thought I was going to check all those back boxes, and then I'd be okay. There was something out there that was going to fix whatever it was in here that just didn't seem to fit right. And nobody else in my family's alcoholic, and I end up going to Penn State University, and I'm there, and I'm horribly depressed. I'm drinking every day. And I find myself on academic probation, where they're going to invite me to leave the university, right? And I'm sitting there going, oh shit, I got to find a way to get a medical withdrawal or something. I got to go home and regroup. And, there's a lot of regrouping in my life. And I go to this CAP center down there, and they start talking to me, about my life. And, everything keeps coming back to my drinking and partying, and I'm smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day. I can't wake up before noon. And this guy wants to keep talking about my drinking. And I'm just like, oh, okay. So he goes, Steve, we're going to meet here again next week. And I want you to tell me how many times you think you can drink and party between now and when we meet next week. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm going, all right, we got a big game against Michigan this weekend, so it's probably going to be a big one. So I'm going to go with 4. And I went home with the sincere desire to only drink 4 times that week, right? And something would happen when I get home on Monday night. I'd be watching The Simpsons or something, and I'd start drinking. And I'd be like, oh, you're so Smithers. And then Friday comes. And I'm sitting there and I'm going, I knew Monday to Friday happened. I didn't know what a blackout was. I thought I'd stumbled onto like tenets of time travel or something. And I found myself sitting there going, what the hell just happened? Like, I know Tuesday through Friday happened, but I couldn't tell you what happened. And I go back into the office the next week, and I went, dude, I drank every day. And he was just looking at me, and he, starts to talk to me in this, recovery language, and recommends that I go to this rehab. And all I could remember thinking was, yes, I managed that decision to get me out of this jam one more time. And I go off to rehab, right? I'm 23 years old. Now, haven't graduated college yet. I'm 23 years old. And I end up in this place called the Caron Foundation, Wernersville, Pennsylvania, back in 1996, okay? Now, when I walked into this place, I go to this detox, and I'm watching people withdraw from hard drugs and stuff, and I had some blood pressure fluctuations. They give you the physical, they check, make sure you didn't bring anything in with you, and they give me this big book, this 3rd edition big book, and I'm like, what the hell is this thing? And I'm watching these people withdraw from these hard drugs, and I'm like, man, well, I wonder what's wrong with those guys. I'm glad I don't have what they have, right? And I remember getting out of detox and going into the population. I was there for 28 days, and I learned all about my triggers and talked a little bit about my childhood and stuff, but I never actually heard what I suffered from. I mean, I remember being in group and talking about all this stuff and, playing a lot of solitaire. And I remember sitting down with this guy, Father Bill, and I had this big issue with shame and and religion and all this other stuff. And my dad was he was going to be a priest before he got married, so I had like that whole staunch deal. And it's like I had a big thing with shame that space between my behavior and my belief systems, right, of how I was acting. And I just remember talking to Father Bill. I was like, man, I just feel like I've been let down by this God, a higher power thing. He goes, Steve, he goes, look, when people go into an active addiction, you lose your power of choice. You lose your self-will. So you weren't chosen. You didn't choose to leave God. You were driven. You were made to leave. It was like your free will was taken away. You didn't have the choice. It's like you were taken. And that landed on me, but I didn't really understand again what the problem was. So I couldn't really relate to the solution. I just thought I knew there was like this higher power gap or this God thing that I had to get in touch with. But kind of like Dr. Bob knew that he needed a spiritual answer, but he had no idea what the problem was till Bill brought him, what the problem was from Dr. Silkworth. So I leave with my relapse prevention program, and I go back home where all great success stories start, on mom and dad's couch, and I'm just going to regroup, and I'm going to kind of rally the troops and just not drink and go to meetings and go to 90 meetings in 90 days, and some guy my age now picks me up and starts taking me to meetings, and back in 1996, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous was not really popular in the rooms of AA. There was a lot of speaker meetings, open discussion meetings, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, if your ass falls off, pick it up and take it to a meeting kind of talk. And I would go to meetings and share, right? And I would share my thoughts and feelings on the day and try to, pick up things. And well, I lucked out. I fell in love with the fellowship. Right, and what it did, I didn't get better right away. I was crazy in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I just remember going to the diner, a lot, and going to the sober softball stuff, and something started to happen within the 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 6 months. I start becoming unglued in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm thinking, well, man. This can't be all there is. This can't be all there is to recovery. I feel terrible, and I haven't had a drink in like 6-8 months. Like, what the hell's going on? I had no idea I was suffering from a part of this illness, the bedevilments, the spiritual malady, this unmanageability that I later learned what was. So I kind of just dismissed it, got back into school, gave it the old college try, and I went into levels of self-reliance like you wouldn't believe. I was trying to just not drink and go to meetings and the right self-centered sexual misconduct, the right status, the right this, the right that. Like, I started looking for door number 3 before I knew there was a door number 3. And I didn't know I was being driven beyond my ability to control my thoughts, my beliefs, or any of that stuff. And long story short, I graduate from college. I moved to South Florida in the late 90s to pursue a career in professional golf. I had some guys put some money together for me, and I went down to South Florida in the late 90s, right? And I go down there, and I start having the same experience. Now, this is now several, I'm at least 5 years or so in recovery, and haven't had a bit of, nobody asked me to sponsor them. I never spoke anywhere. Nobody wanted what I had. And I start going down to these meetings, and I'm walking around, I'm going, man, this is the same crap I heard up in Pennsylvania, right? And I was just like, man, this is not what I'm looking for. I was like, okay, AA, thanks for getting the booze and drugs off me. I'll take it from here, right? And thinking that I had just a drug and alcohol problem. It's like, now that I got that off me, now I can go get those cash and prizes, right? And I go out, and a couple of years into this process, I get a back injury, a debilitating one that ends my playing career. And I walk into a doctor's office in the late 90s in South Florida. What? And you've heard this story before. And I walk in, and they start giving me these pain pills. They asked me to rate my... Now, I'm a big believer in singleness and purpose. The only reason I bring this up, because I had a lot of little spiritual awakenings, of the educational variety that, the Appendix 2 talks about in the back of our book, and little growth moments, little attitude changes sufficient to stay at least sober in that period of sobriety, right, that many of us experience. And I start, taking these pills the way they're prescribed. I was never a pill guy till I became a pill guy. And I was, I'm smoking a lot, and I can't play. And I met this mentor down in Florida, this teaching guru guy that basically just adopted me. And he just kept saying, "See you tomorrow, see you tomorrow." And he was like this legendary Hall of Fame guy that used to play on the PGA Tour and back in the 50s. And he basically took me under his wing and taught me how to teach golf, right? And I'd be the guy he'd send out on the professional tours when the players got messed up. Because I came up with a lot of these guys, and he knew I was a player and that I wouldn't mess them up, like go out there trying to sound overly confident or overly intelligent. I was like, have you met me? And so I'd be the guy out there doing that. And then during the summertime, I'd teach up in the Hamptons at this posh club up in Southampton, and then I'd winter in Palm Beach, right? And I'd do that whole thing north-south, and I'm like, I'm getting the hang of this sobriety thing, right? This is great. And and life got better, I felt a little bit, I didn't have a lot of those consequences, never got a DUI, any of that stuff. But man, I'm now 12 years doing this stuff, and the back would flare up every now and again, and I just remember at 12 years, when things were at their absolute best, at their absolute peak, suddenly descended upon me. The strange mental blank spot. If you would have told me I was going to drink that morning, I would have called you crazy. There wasn't a cloud in the sky, nothing bad, right? And watching TV one night, I'm staying at a buddy's house, and I just had the thought. And I picked up and I made myself a drink, and craziest thing happened. Nothing. And I'm like, maybe I was just making a big deal out of, that little spell I was going through in my early 20s. I said, I'm going to ride this pony and see if anything happens. I'll just go back to AA, thinking that I could, right? And alcohol started working again for a little while. I was drinking on the weekends, right? At the time, my girlfriend, who's now my wife, was working overnight. So on the weekends, she'd leave for work, and I would go and hang out with these young 20-something neighbors of mine. And I couldn't tell you, and I'd walk down my stairs and walk up their stairs. And there were nights I couldn't tell you how I got home. And it was nuts. And now it's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I'm going, now 3 years into this process, alcohol stops working again. Now, I'm a drinking member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm trying to just not drink and go to meetings and go back, and I'm hearing the same stuff I'm hearing, and something weird happens when you start showing up to these $1 million athletes tournaments and you're smelling of booze and you got one eye open from the night before. The phone stops ringing. And I had to get a job, like an actual job, like teaching golf up in a club and folding sweaters and running tournaments, and I hate that stuff, right? I'm an outdoor cat, right? I like to travel and be free and do all these other things according to my will. And, I move back up to the north, and I've got this job I hate, and I'm drinking against my will, and I'm trying to find a meeting that I can go to that's going to give me a different experience. And I'm hearing the same things, because as Rianne was talking about last night, I did what I was asked. I did what was asked of me, right? Not that anyone was trying to keep it from me. That's the experience they had. That's where I kind of landed in AA. Meeting-based sobriety, the fellowship, which is awesome. It's a big part of our circle and triangle. And I remember now at this time, I got a house, I got a wife, I got a kid, and I'm drinking, and I got this job I hate, and it's like 2014, and that drink I took lasted 6 years. And I'm sitting there going, man, what happened? Like I'm one of those constitutionally incapable people, all right, that they talk about. And I remember, having to leave work to go get stuff. Now, I'm hanging out with guys with golden prescriptions and Ferraris and a lot of money and all this other stuff. So I never had to pay for any of this stuff. So, why would you quit? Right? The price was too high. The price was too high. And I find myself going and picking up my son at daycare. Now, I'm a blackout drinker. I tend to leave the stove on when I'm cooking and stuff, right? And I just forget about things. And I go home, and my wife was working late that night, and I knew I had a window, right, Eric? The window. And I go and I get some. I got a carton of cigarettes. I've got a baby in a car seat and a bottle of vodka. And I'm like Norman Rockwell painting, right? and I go home and I make my son dinner and I put him down and I drink everything. I drink too soon. Right, I didn't quite get the effect I needed, and I got a couple hours. So I leave my sleeping infant in the house, and I get in my car, and I drive down this windy road called River Road. And I could have got a DUI, I could have got into an accident. It didn't even cross my mind. And I used to beat myself up for that fact that I was like, my God, I love booze and drugs more than I love my own kid. And through the inventory process, I learned that is absolutely not true. It's not that I love booze and drugs more than I love my own kid. It's just that booze and drugs is more powerful. And I got it. There's that power thing again, right? Still had no idea what I suffered from. Right? I just knew I needed to quit. I knew something about AA worked, but I remember going to meetings, and there was one night I was at this 12 and 12 meeting, and I lost my mind on these people. And I was like, this can't be it. There's got to be some secret meeting that people aren't telling me about. This can't be it. Like this 12 and 12 crap. If one more person tells me to take it easy, I'm going to strangle them. And I was like, oh my God. And within 2 weeks, people were giving me prayer cards with the 3rd and 7th step prayer on it because they didn't want to say anything to me. They didn't want to be like, hey, come on up here and just whatever you say, don't tell them to go to more meetings. And here's the thing. I started saying the 3rd and 7th step prayer and meaning it. Before I knew what this come to believe thing was, before I knew what this God was, because when I came in here, I got this thing, I wrote it down because I will butcher these things because I still have a Swiss cheese brain. But the 12 and 12 described me to a T. And I would hear these things and I would be like, I think there's some truth to what it is they're saying, but I don't really understand where I fit in this place. Because it's like I'm reading the map at the mall. It says you are here, and I'm looking for the X. I'm like, I can't find myself. Where am I? All right. So there will be those who have drifted into indifference, those filled with self-sufficiency who have cut themselves off, those who have become prejudiced against religion, and those who are downright defiant because God has failed to fulfill their demands. Sometimes AA comes harder to those who have lost or rejected faith than to those who have never had any faith at all, for they think they have tried faith and found it wanting. They have tried the way of faith and the way of no faith. Since both ways have proved bitterly disappointing, they have concluded that there is no place whatever for them to go. The roadblocks of indifference, fancied self-sufficiency, prejudice, and defiance often prove more solid and formidable for those people than any erected by the unconvinced agnostic or even the militant atheist. Obviously, the dilemma of the wanderer from faith is that of profound confusion. He thinks himself lost to the comfort of any conviction at all. He cannot attain in even a small degree the assurance of the believer, the agnostic, or the atheist. He's the bewildered one. And that pegged me to the wall. And I was like, well, maybe there might be something to this God thing. And I'm drinking against my will. And I'm behind this church, bawling my eyes out, knowing I'm either going to drink myself to death, kill myself, or I have to hear something different. And I go into this church, and people had been giving me Sandy Beach CDs and Bob Darrell CDs, and Bob Darrell's voice would be like, the narrator to my self-pity. He has that tone and just the right seasoning. And I was just like, yeah, Yeah, you get me, man. And he happened to be at this conference, right? And I go in and I hear this lady reading this thing for this something called the Jersey Shore Roundup. And this is 2014, right? And it's way off in the future because Jimmy sends these things out like 3 years in advance to get people to sign up. And I'm sitting there going, what the hell is that? So I kind of file it, back here. And I'm saying these prayers, and I go home one night, and I had a really rough night. I tried to, I was looking to hear something at these meetings that was going to keep me out of the liquor store that night, because a lot of nights I'd lose that bet. And I remember going to this one meeting, and there was a guy who got sober the same year as mine, but he stayed sober, and he used to talk about these crusty old-timers that would just say, get in the car. And they'd read the book to him, and they'd tell him what to do, and tell him and all of a sudden he started to have this experience. And he's trying to describe step one to the room at this one meeting, and he happened to lock eyes with me. And he says, you have absolutely no idea how sick you are. And I was like... And then he just went on about his talk, and he stopped my world. And I wish I could tell you, I walked up to that guy after the meeting and say, what did you mean by that? I drank vodka at that guy for like 3 months. I'd wake up in the middle of the night going, what is it? That. Whatever he's talking about, I have that. And I'm starting to get these little pieces starting to come together from AA Town, right? And I'm going, oh my God. So I've got this thing with the Jersey Shore Roundup. Now it's January of 2014. I got sober in April. And I had a really rough night, and I walk in, I got an 18-month-old little boy, right? And I got to go out and smoke and drink my coffee and do what I do. And I feel like death. I mean, it's like, we call alcohol poisoning a hangover, right? Because those other people are wimps, right? And I go out on my back porch. There's not a cloud in the sky. It's a crisp January morning, right? And I go out there and I'm smoking a cigarette. My little boy's crying like you wouldn't believe. He just wants to be out there with Daddy and pick him up. And I'm like, I got to go in and wash my hands up to my elbows, get the secondary smoke off and all that stuff. And I turn around to tell him, say, Dylan, Daddy will be in a minute. And when I turned around, I caught my reflection in the French doors. Bright white light hits the glass, hits me, fills me with mortal fear. And on the spot, I am relieved of a 20-year cigarette addiction. Now, I don't know what happened to me that day, but this, I'm thinking like Bill's white light experience, the peppermint patty, breeze through the hair, everything feels great. This sucked. This felt awful. It was one of the worst feeling things I've ever experienced in my life. I was filled with mortal fear, but at the same time, I was filled with the ability to endure it. And I don't do that. When some bad things happen in my life, I'm standing here like this, looking for a grown-up to pick me up. And I start going, and within like 30 days or so, I lose the job I hate. And now I'm sitting there. This is right before the start of my season where I make the majority of my money. And I'm going, oh my God, what am I going to do? So I find myself not being able to sleep more than 2 hours a night. It was like a match was lit to the base of my skull 24/7. I couldn't hold a thought in my head. I started going to 3 meetings a day. I was hallucinating. I'd have like these weird trails off everything. And I was going through acute nicotine withdrawal. I had no idea what the hell that was, but I wouldn't recommend it. And 90 days later to the day, the same thing happens with opiates and alcohol. Now, this is not one of our suggested 12 steps, I didn't go to detox, I didn't go to anything. It was like the invisible hand of God just came in and went, we're going to need you to stop that now. And I started going to these meetings, and people were afraid to sit near me. Like, I had 3 open chairs. I realized this after the fact when I could actually... This lasted for 6 months and a day. I don't know what the extra day was about. But, I'd have guys who had 40 years would walk up, give me a half a cup of coffee. And they remember what it was like to come in that shot out. If you would have sat down and started reading the big book to me, I would have punched you in the neck. Right? I couldn't comprehend any of that stuff. So I was going to 3 meetings a day. I'm reading this big book with this guy that he sat down with me and he started trying to read this thing to me, and it was like a novel. And I remember being in rehab going, who the hell wrote this thing? I mean, this is the weirdest language I've ever heard. Like, who talks like this? And I thought it was like this history thing that they give you as a keepsake. And I didn't know the big book. The big book was an old school textbook where they'd tell you what they're going to tell you, then they tell you, then they tell you what they told you. And it's designed to bring about a spiritual experience. It's like I had no idea. This was like, oh my God. So I'm having the same experience with this stuff, and then I end up taking this guy down. I was like, look, we got to try something. We got to try something different, because I've done everything else, thinking I'd done the steps, right? Because nobody told me. Nobody really sat down, and they said, you worked the first 3 steps getting here, and I was like, okay. And I told my life story to somebody, and I got a little bit of relief from, made a couple tornado amends, that kind of stuff. So as you can see, it never did a discipline, never sponsored anybody. And I go down to this thing called the Jersey Shore Roundup, and I started hearing. Now, at this conference, there was Bob Darrell, Bob Bizantz, Katie Parker, Charlie Parker, Ralph White, everybody, Scott Lee, all these guys. I was just like, I had no idea it would become my Mount Rushmore of speakers, right? And I'm sitting in the back of the room with this guy at 42 years, and it was the first time I had ever heard what I actually suffered from. In a room full of 800 people, I'm sitting there hearing about the phenomenon of craving, that's the distinguishing characteristic that makes me alcoholic. If I don't have it, I'm not an alcoholic. And that's a pretty big problem, but not your biggest problem. You got a mind that's going to take you back to a drink every time because of this other aspect, this restless, irritable discontentedness, this 3-prong illness that we suffer from. Oh, and by the way, it's fatal. And I am sitting there, and I sideways Stewie had my sponsor. And I look at him, I go, have you ever heard anybody talk about recovery or first step like this? And he goes, well, no, but they're professional speakers. I was like, what the hell does that have to do with anything? Mental note to self, I need to get a new sponsor. And then I hear people talk about step 2, because it's like you get to step 2 with a gun to your head. It's like, remember this whole problem you had with, God and religion back in the day? Well, let's add to this thing, this fire-breathing dragon you got behind you in step 1. And you got to walk over this tightrope out into this darkness that you have no idea what it's going to be like. And I'm like, well, it's like alcoholics are the only people in the world that you have to convince to take the deal of the century. This is the only, I'm going to find out, wait, well, you mean everything? Are you sure? And it's just like, how about stay out of the money and my sex life and the porn? No? Okay, that too. I got this gun to my head with step 1. So I'm like, where's the choice, right? And I love how at the beginning of We Agnostics, it kind of restates, what our problem is, right? It says, I got to read it because I'll butcher it. It's like that game Telephone, where it gets to the end of the thing and you'll be like, what the hell book's he reading that out of? So in the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism, right? That I've got the phenomenon of craving, the mental obsession, and the spiritual malady. That's what kind of gets me my seat here, right? We hope we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. If, when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if, when drinking, you have little control over the amount you take, you are probably alcoholic. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. Only? It's like, man, to be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. And I was at my jumping off point. And I remember hearing the rest of this conference, and this little lady from Austin, Texas, named Katie Parker gets up there, and she split the room with this talk, and I felt like she was talking to me. And there's a lady from Al-Anon there named Larcene, and she brought it, and I remember I got there late the next morning, And I'm sitting there at the coffee thing, and everybody's inside, and it's just me out there, and I feel this little whop on my shoulder, and I look over, and it's Katie, dressed to the nines, right? And she just starts looking at me. She saw the new guy on me. And she goes, it's a lot, isn't it? And I don't know how long we were there. I must have talked to her for like 10, 15 minutes. And I just started throwing up my life on her. I had no idea. I'd never met this lady, but man, she knew me. And I just started talking about this stuff. And, I got their information, and her husband, Charlie, God bless him, got up there and just knocked any pin that was left standing out of the park with his Step 12 talk. Right? And I started to see that alcoholism was a way bigger problem than I thought it was. But the solution AA offered was way bigger than I wanted to give it credit for. I didn't get it. I thought I had a drinking problem, right? And if you just get that off me, then I'll be okay, right? And my God, I mean, a couple of weeks later, I started, he had mentioned Mark Houston in his talk, and I started listening to CDs because I didn't want to sound like an idiot, like a new guy, not wanting to sound like an idiot, talking about, recovery. And I called up Charlie. I emailed him first, and then he told me to call him. And he sent me a bunch of stuff, and I described what I understood Step 1 to be, from some of his talks and things like that. And he looked at me, he goes, well, where are you at with Step 2? I was like, oh, I grew up Catholic. I skipped that. And there's this pregnant pause on the other end of the phone. He goes, maybe we ought to give We Agnostics a read. And I did, and I realized, I was like, man, I was just like, it's basically what I got out of it, and kind of like what Devin was talking about. I didn't understand this stuff when I was going through it. When I had to actually, when I got to the 12 step and started sponsoring people, when I had to start helping you, I started taking this stuff a lot more serious in the book, because I can see it on you. I can't see it on me, right? And this process, the whole point of it is to, gain access to this power that's going to solve my problem. And my responsibility is, one, to watch for this stuff so I don't keep recycling, the insanity. And then two, I gotta help carry that message. I gotta help the still sick and suffering. Find out where their X is on that map. You are here, right? Qualify them. Talk to them about what this process is, what they're willing to do. All that stuff. And it's it's not like a linear thing. It's like this. What Devin was saying was there's a cycle to it. And I had the funniest thing. I saw Karen walk in here, and I told this Step 1 joke at her home group. And man, it really, especially after Eric's talk, and the insanity of the mental obsession. Because I come in here thinking my problem is alcohol. And it's, they tell us on page 23, it's our thinking. The mind is the main problem. And I was just like, and I just remember hearing this joke on one of my attempts to get back in here. And this guy said, there's this alcoholic who just got off a real bad run. And, he'd had alcohol had taken absolutely everything from him. The jobs, the houses, the cars, the wife, the family. And he comes to one morning, and he's got a jug of vodka, the handle of vodka in his truck, and he's sitting there and he's going, oh my God, I did it again. Doesn't know how many days have passed, all this, that, and the other thing, and he's just looking at this bottle in the front seat of this truck, and he goes, that is it. We are through. You have taken everything that's been meaningful to me, all my money, all my family, all my jobs. We're through. And he gets out of his truck and he takes the bottle and he's about ready to smash it on this guardrail. And the little bit of vodka starts moving around in the jug handle up there. It makes this weird noise that only that stuff can make in a jug handle. He looks back aghast and he goes, did I just hear you apologize? It would, that implies that there's something more than human power needed here, right? And, I get into this process of Step 1 and Step 2, and then they tell me that alcohol is but a symptom. It's really selfishness and self-centeredness that's the root of our problem. And I'm going, have you seen the title of the book? It's called Alcoholics Anonymous. Are you telling me I suffer from toxic selfishism? And they're like, well, yeah. And so, they go through these conditions that Chad's going to talk about. I'll try not to step too much on step 3, but it's the keystone. It's the thing that holds it all together. I've got to really see that living a life based on self-will can hardly be a success, right? That God's got to be the director and I'm the actor. And my whole life I've been living as though I was the director. And wondering like, wow, man, me doing my very best got me a seat in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Burned my life to the ground. Maybe so you're telling me I can pick my own conception of this power? It doesn't have to be my dad's God or anything like that. I can, God doesn't make too hard of terms for those who seek Him. If I earnestly seek. Remember the fire-breathing dragon, right? That's got to motivate me, because if I don't have that step 1 experience there, I am not going to do what 2 through 12 ask me to do. I'm gonna run out of steam at inventory or amends, and I'll start having ideas again about what's a justified resentment and who I get to make amends to, and And I was able to kind of run through this stuff. And Charlie and Katie introduced me to my sponsor, Bill. And Chad, please tell Bill I was wearing a coat and a tie. Thank you. Because he will ask. And he listened to I had 125 pages in that first inventory. And Katie taught me how to write inventory and how to do an extended third column. And I started to see the old ideas and belief systems starting to show up in column 3. And these are things that I would later be watching for in my 10th step, because after all, that's where sanity is returned, right? I got to go through all these steps. I thought step 2 happened at step 2, and it happens at step 10, provided I stay close to Him and perform His work well. Right? There's no and after that, right? And I go through that inventory process, and I share it with my sponsors. So now I got some meat on the bone for 6 and 7. Now I go, wow, there are things that old ideas that would land here, become a fact for me, and I would act on their behalf as though my life depended on it. Half of the stuff I didn't even believe or couldn't do myself. Delusion, right? So by the time I get out of the hour in the 5th step and do 6 and 7, I've got a list of people I'm willing to make amends to. Except 3. Right? There are 3 amends I was not willing to make because I knew how it was going to go. And that carried me right up into the pandemic. Okay, now, anybody else not pandemic well? Yeah, thank you. You guys are all giants. And I get furloughed. I got this job. Like, this whole thing kicked off my birthday. Kobe Bryant died. 2020, January 26th, right? By March, global shutdown. And during that time, I was just about to get the cash and prizes. I was just about to get the big promotion that would double my money and half the amount of hours I worked. And a global pandemic happened. And I'm an outdoor cat. And now I'm at home homeschooling a 7-year-old. And then within a week, I am writing inventory on a 7-year-old for acting like a 7-year-old. And I'm calling my sponsor Bill twice a week about this stuff, and I'm like, guys, I scared my son. I scared him because it started coming. Because here's the truth of it. I was uncomfortable. And hell hath no fury like an alcoholic that's uncomfortable. Right? And that was me. And I'm sitting there angry again. And I'm calling Bill, and Bill's going, this is becoming a common theme here. Maybe we ought to start some two-way prayer stuff. And I had all kinds of issues with that. And then all of a sudden I started watching better. And what was crazy, when I relapsed before, I was pushed in the direction I was facing. And that was out of AA, right? I was all about back into self-reliance. I was all about me and Steve reliance. And during this time when the pandemic hit, I was facing AA. And we started a circle and triangle check-in on Zoom with the guys that I work with. Because eventually people started asking me to sponsor them, right? And we got like 8 or 9 guys that we do this with every Sunday night. It's basically how many meetings you get to, where you at in the steps, and who you helping. and any other, pertinent problems, because it's just us, spiritual consent, the whole deal. And we do our thing. And, that got us through. It got us through the pandemic. And I mean, there's times, during this stuff where I got to send inventory. I've sent inventory to Devin. I've sent inventory to, on, my phone to try to get out of this stuff, because I made this deal that I'm going to stay close to him, and I got to watch out for those things. That's the sanity part of step 2. The alcohol's kind of like, I haven't had a thought about drinking in a while, but man, I'm not one of the suicidal type. I'm the homicidal type. And when I start feeling that way, I know I've drifted. I know I've gotten back down into levels of insanity, because I used to think the mental obsession and insanity just had to do with alcohol, until I started living sober for a while. And my biggest understandings and awakenings with these steps have happened as a result of the 10th step, not when I was going through the first time. The first time I went through it, I just learned how to write it. I learned what I thought the problem was. And then I started learning how to try to practice this way of living. And I'm gonna end with a couple of, how are we doing on time here, Teddy? I can't see that. 10? All right. After I'd started living this way, my dad, who was, responsible for a lot of the, what I thought was responsible for a lot of the misery and pain and abuse that I had suffered growing up with church and religion and things like that, and I had a lot of, abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, like the whole deal. And I remember being 8 years old, being pushed up the wall by my neck, being screamed at for something I can't remember even now today what I did, and then being told to get in the car and go to church. Right? It's like, I was like, if that's your idea of what this is, man, you can have it. I'm not doing that again. And I'm rocking around for the next 30 years with a conception of God of like a 12 or a 13-year-old boy. And I'm like, I think I know how this is going to work, right? And he calls me up and he tells me I got to get my son baptized. And I lost it. And I hung up on him. And I was like, you have lost the right to give me any type of spiritual advice for life. And I didn't speak to that man for a year, because you can't talk to me like that, right? And he would come up with my mom at the time and visit family. And I didn't go see him. And I sent my wife and my son over to see him, because I'm going to punish him. And over the next year, that's what I did. And he was so hurt that I did. And I did this sober, guys. This wasn't a result of drunkenness. I have created some of the worst harm sober, because I fall asleep. Alcoholism comes equipped with part of the illness I don't think you hear talked about much in the big book. It's called spiritual narcolepsy. I fall asleep regularly to this stuff. And my dad was so hurt when he came up, he got on a plane the next day and went home. And during that time, I was punishing him. That would be the last year I would know my mother as my mother. She got dementia. And I robbed my mom the ability to get to know her grandson. And I robbed my son the ability to get to know his grandmother, because you can't talk to me like that. Because I had unfinished amends. Because I thought I knew how it was going to go. Right? And this was one of the 3 resentments. And Bill couldn't get me off it. I was like a dog with a bone. So he had me call Katie. And I had to make an appointment, because she sponsors half the world. And I started reading one piece of inventory 2.5 hours. And she starts asking me questions like a news reporter. Like, okay, are your parents still married? Where'd you grow up? How was the money situation? Where'd you fall in that lineup? And asking me all these questions, and she's painting context around. I didn't realize she's teaching me how to listen, how to hear inventory. Right? Already taught me how to write. Now I'm getting like this black belt version of how to do this stuff. And after a bunch of these questions, she starts hitting me with the haymaker, and she's like, "Is there anything your dad does better than you?" Well, and I go, "What do you mean?" I needed time to think of a clever answer. And it's like, "What do you mean?" She goes, "Well, was he a better provider than you?" "What do you mean?" He had 4 kids, you had 1. Ooh. It's like, did you not hear what he did? right? And it's like, well, what are some of the good things? Well, he taught me my profession. He was always at my games. Like, he always, like, that was the best he could do with what his dad died of alcoholism, right? He had no idea what he was dealing with, the juggernaut, the genetic bullet that I got. He had no idea how to heal with that, but I would punish him for not knowing. And him doing, he's the one who drove me to rehab, left in tears, right? Because that was the very best he could do. And I get at the end of that conversation, I'm like, oh my God, right? And he happened to be up at my mom. My mom was having problems up in the Lehigh Valley in the hospital, and I drove over, and I got to make amends to him in the parking lot. And I got him to receive, I watched him receive a gift. I watched him heal. And part of the son was restored to sanity that day. My role in that family. I mean, they're still batshit crazy, but I have a program that I can take into that. Like, I was not the first phone call on the list for people, like when my dad got sick last summer. He's my primary caretaker, or my mom's primary caretaker with dementia, right? And he goes into renal failure, has to go into the hospital daily for dialysis, and my sister gets on the phone and calls me and asks me, Steve, can you jump on a plane? Dad's in a bad way. And I go down there, and I'm doing my prayer and meditation every morning. I have the thought, just make the approach. And I'm going, I didn't think I could make amends to my mom. She was gone, right? And I was sitting there in prayer and meditation. You ever argue with the still small voice in your head? Yeah. And just make the approach. And every afternoon in Central Florida, there is a downpour of thunder, lightning, rain, things like that. And I'm taking my mom over after she gets up. And it starts raining, and it hits me. And I look at my mom, and I go, Mom, I need to talk to you. And I just start. And guys, what happened? My mom showed up. My mom was there. She grabbed me. My mom showed up. She grabbed my hand, looked out the window, and she's just petting my hand, going, I know, baby. And I am crying in every direction possible. There's tears going up. I was weeping. I had never, and for 2 weeks I talked about what happened. And it was like, during that process, it was just like this stuff came out of the middle of me. And it was just healing. And I watched her just, so you just keep doing what you're doing. And that's when that part of my life was returned to sanity. Like, I thought I knew how that was going to go, right? And the truth is I don't. I always have an opinion about what I think I need to do, or that's not a good idea. I think it was Rianne that said, if it scares you, do it anyway. And there's always like growth on the end of that stuff, right? You know, Roland Hazard went to see Dr. Young back in the day, and he spends a year with him. Right? And he's, wealthy family. This learns every bit of self-knowledge you can learn about relapse. And he goes to visit some friends, and he gets drunk on the train. He comes back and he goes, man, he goes, you got to give it to me straight. What's wrong with me? And he goes, you're hopeless. I've never had any success with people of your variety. And he's like, there's got to be something I can do. And he goes, well, yeah, there is. He goes, here and there, once in a while, people have vital spiritual experiences. I've been trying to bring this about in you, but every event I've had is true. And I think I know that I don't need to have that experience, right? And what's crazy is I had this big book for a good 18 years before I really understood the tool that it was, right? We have a book that produces here and there once in a while. It is a book for wholesale miracle in your life. And it doesn't matter what you know. It doesn't matter if you can come up and speak about it. It only matters what you do. And it's available to everybody. So go get yours. That's all I got.